Moscow has announced the opening of new humanitarian corridors for Ukrainians to escape Russian bombardment. But the new paths to safety lead to Russia itself and Belarus. Is the move immediately dismissed by Kyiv as an immoral stunt? Ukraine says the corridors are unlikely to happen as long as Russian forces keep trying to advance.
More Russian tanks are rolling in near the capital as Moscow warns of an assault on Kyiv. Russian troops are pummeling Ukrainian cities from air, land and sea. But Moscow has said it will hold fire to open humanitarian corridors to transport Ukrainians. But Ukraine has rejected those proposed corridors as it leads its civilians out of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol and Sumy into Russia itself or its ally Belarus.
Ми вимагаємо від Російської Федерації припинити маніпулювати і зловживати довірою світових лідерів, таких як Еммануель Макрон, таких як лідери Китаю, Туреччини чи Індії, і зробити відкритими маршрути, які ми вказали. Ми вимагаємо від Російської Федерації прийняти варіанти наших маршрутів, а також встановити режим припинення вогню, про який ми домовимось.
Ukraine has already seen two recent attempts to allow thousands of civilians to leave Mariupol, ending in disaster. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has accused Moscow of deliberate murder over civilian deaths.
Ми не пробачимо розстріли беззбройних людей, руйнацію нашої інфраструктури. Ми не пробачимо сотні жертв, тисячі і тисячі страждань. І Бог не пробачить ні сьогодні, ні завтра, ніколи.
Russia's campaign has pushed more than 1.5 million people across Ukraine's borders as refugees. As the fighting rages and civilian casualties rise, Kyiv and Moscow have been set to face off at the United Nations top court in a legal bid to halt the devastating war.
The court meets to hear the oral argument of Ukraine on its request for the indication of provisional measures submitted in the case concerning allegations of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Ukraine versus the Russian Federation.
But Russia's seat at the International Court of Justice was empty.
And Philip Crowther joins us live from Lviv. Philip, generosity from many receiving Ukrainian refugees, but still reports of racism against these refugees, reports suggesting of Africans and Asians being targeted.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I can confirm some of those reports. There have been reports from, more than anything, the train stations in Ukraine, in the capital Kyiv, for example, but also here in the west in Lviv, that some African students or African citizens or Asian citizens are simply not getting priority, or rather that others are getting priority to get into those trains to escape those areas worst affected by the Russian invasion. I'll give you one example of a very large group of Indian students who we met in the southeast of Poland, the closest airport, in fact, to the Polish-Ukrainian border. They had got out of Kyiv after a 5 or 6 day odyssey, essentially, on all sorts of means of transport. And they told me of that exact story as well, that they were waiting for a long, long time on the train, on the station platforms to get onto those trains out of Kyiv, and that Ukrainians were given priority. And one of those Indian students even told me that the pets were given priority ahead of them. Those are pretty startling stories that have been confirmed by many people who've seen them with their own eyes. Now, you mentioned, though, that what happens on the other side of the border is it's actually exemplary from what I have seen. This is on the Polish side of the border, where we were for 2 days, and from where we entered Ukraine yesterday. The humanitarian aid for refugees from Ukraine, be it citizens of Ukraine or of other countries, is very, very well organized. There are long lines at the border on the Ukrainian side, of course, for people on foot and people in cars, vans and buses. Once the other side, and it takes a very, very long time. There are warm meals waiting for them. There are all sorts of there's medical help for them as well, and there's a little bit of shelter as well for 1 or 2 or maybe more nights. And then there's also transport organized for all of these refugees to get into other parts of Poland where maybe family members or friends would be willing to put them up in their houses, or they might be going further afield. There are volunteer buses manned by volunteers ready to pick up refugees and take them to the likes of Germany or Denmark or Italy. The amount of volunteers we're seeing and the humanitarian aid we've seen on the Polish side of the border has been very, very reassuring, and must be very reassuring for all of those fleeing this country at war right now.
Philip Granther live from Lviv. They're outlining the picture for refugees from Ukraine.
We also have with us Ukrainian journalist Andriy Derela. He joins us live now from Hermanatsky for more on this. That's in western Ukraine. Andriy, Moscow says that the humanitarian corridors are open. Kyiv has rejected the plan. Has there been any visible progress of that promise of proposed safe passage out of harm's way by Russia for Ukrainians who want to leave?
Unfortunately, no, I do not think that there has been any progress at all with the humanitarian corridor so far. So overnight, Russia did propose a corridor to Belarus and Russia itself, which was not accepted by Ukraine. It was denounced as unacceptable and cynical. And the only chance, I think, for now is that today is the third round of negotiations. It's supposed to take place later today. And the hope is that the sides will finally be able to agree on a corridor which will not be violated. Because also right now we are hearing reports of Russian troops regrouping in different parts of Ukraine and maybe mounting another wave of attacks. So the hope is that we will get the corridors before it is too late for the civilians to leave the most dangerous places in the country.
Andriy, there have been wide-ranging and punishing sanctions against Russia so far, but President Zelenskyy wants even more, despite what's already in place. What does he have in mind?
Yes, yesterday Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that the sanctions so far has not been felt enough by Russia, and said that it is time to impose even more of those sanctions. And then today, he also said that what he talks about is a full-fledged trade embargo. Simply speaking, it would mean that all the international partners of Ukraine would have to stop selling things to Russia and stop buying things from Russia. And this would be a decisive blow to the Russian economy, which President Zelenskyy says would be able to stop the war and stop the invasion.
Andriy, thank you for that update. Andriy Derela there from Hermanatsky in western Ukraine.